Good afternoon and good evening.
How are you doing,
Welcome
Sonia?
to the Zero Waste Asia Newsroom. I'm doing good, Arpita. So I'm Sonia Astudillo, Senior Communications Officer for GAIA Asia Pacific. And we're here to bring you the latest updates on the second day of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution currently being held in Paris. Plastic is one of the most significant threats to the environment and the health of communities, and the ongoing negotiations is aiming for a plastics treaty that is strong and binding. And here to keep us updated and of the developments happening in Paris, we have GAIA Asia Pacific's Plastic Policy Officer, Arpita Bhagat. Welcome back to Zero Waste Asia Newsroom, Arpita. So can you provide us an overview of the developments and key takeaways from yesterday's session?
Yes, but before I do that, I think it would be waste of people's time to not look at this beautiful UNESCO building that's extremely large. And here it is, the Eiffel Tower behind me. It's a beautiful summer afternoon here in Paris, and I feel like a reporter. So glad to be here, and I'm very excited that you all have joined me. Just to give you a very quick recap, as you know from the last INC, we had some bracketed content on the rules of procedure, particularly Rule 38 and Rule 37. Before I go into explaining what those are, bracketed content means, and you can find the draft rules of procedure on the UNEP website. If not, that we can post it in the comment section in a bit. Basically, countries have been working so far in these INCs based on these provisional rules of procedure, as we've called them. Some of them have been agreed upon in the last INC, but there are few contentious ones, specifically Rule 37 and 38. And the plenary yesterday was pretty heated with two sides divided on these particular rules. And why? Let's talk about the why here. Rule 37 basically talks about the voting rights. That means which countries, whether voting is by consensus. That means unless something is agreed upon by all countries, things will not proceed. But it's pretty much like the Paris Agreement under the UNFCCC that we have. And we know that although it sounds really good, right? We talk about consensus often, and we know it sounds very democratic in theory. In practice, in these kind of forums, it can really impede on the success of the treaty, given that if you want agreement from all countries, and we know some countries are really low in ambition and what they want to do on environmental action, you will not have progress unless you have decisions by voting, where small island states, countries like ours in Asia, who are the most impacted by plastic pollution, who really need action at an urgent basis, cannot sort of participate. So, so that's broadly what Rule 37 talks about. And this morning, unfortunately, we are still at a state where these rules are being discussed right now as I speak to you, with the two blocks divided. And really there is the frustration is growing, as I could feel. And let me just point to the Indonesian statement that I accessed from yesterday. They said, we also support the idea of establishing an open-ended consultation for the rules of procedure. So that's a possibility. And perhaps in the next few hours, that conversation could happen. They appealed to other delegations to utilize the remaining time in Paris to be able to make progress, because otherwise we would be at the same stage as we were in the last INC. And that's really not where we want to end this particular meeting. We want to get into discussing the text of the treaty, which cannot happen unless the rules of procedure are formally accepted and put in action. So there is a real threat, and this is concerning for us in the movement of certain member states, pushing consensus pretty hard. And if we don't really get the voting piece, that means Rule 37 accepted, then we would really be limiting the scope of what this treaty could actually do in the times to come, because we know that there is urgency for action across, and a mandatory treaty is what I have been talking about, and I've been telling you since the very start. So that's where we are at, and there was also discussion and concerns on Rule 38, which is on adoption of decision. Let me just read it a little bit here directly from the draft. The committee shall make every effort to reach agreement on all matters of substance by consensus. If all efforts to reach consensus have been exhausted and no agreement has been reached, the decision shall, as the last resort, be taken by 2/3 majority of the representatives of members who are present and voting. So this is one of the points in the Rule 38, and we know from the last INC1 report also said that this is in practice. That means provisional Rule 38 applies, and now there's been discussion for the opening of these rules once again, which is again a very, very concerning situation to be in. And I know that some of the African delegates called out to not do that. So it's a really tense moment here, Sonia, and it's worth looking at. It's almost like watching a kind of a war, being in a war zone and witnessing what's happening and trying to pick sides. And you can hear from some of the resounding claps when Korea, for example, spoke up, or there are some other countries in Latin America that spoke up in favor of voting rights. And really, we are in the majority in terms of voting rights, but the powerful countries still are on the other sides who do not want a strong treaty with binding voting-based agreements. So that's what's happening. Back to you.
So is there a chance for things to be moving forward? I mean, you're already half day of day 2 today.
Yeah, interesting. So we were in the civil society expecting this to happen. We knew rules of procedure would be open. We knew that's the first 3 agenda points. If some of the members here saw the email that went out yesterday, we are still in the first 3 agenda. The idea was to actually go into contact groups. That means to discuss the treaty text in the second half yesterday. And right now we are reaching the break point, and we still haven't gone there. It seems like we will have another drag on day to day, and that's unfortunately the reality. And but hopefully there is an agreement, and then there's an agreement in support of the voting rights. And what members are trying to do and what we are trying to push is to speak to their delegates. And even if you're not here, if you're in touch with some of your delegates, please speak in favor of the voting rights. And we have on GAIA our treaty page where you can access some of these key resource material. We have a paper on circularity of plastics. We have a analysis of options paper, which most of you and many of you across the different regions have contributed towards. We also have a paper on definition of plastic itself, as well as the INC key takeaways and sort of what's expected. So a lot of resources already available, and if you can use the resources, I'm carrying around the printouts here to give away to some of the delegates. Give those, talk to your delegates, see how you can motivate them and get them to realize that it is in their favor to have voting rights in action in this treaty.
Thanks, Arpita. So let's talk about low-income countries. Why is the INC2 so crucial for these communities? These communities are often tagged as sources of plastic pollution, but are in fact the recipient of plastic waste from rich countries.
Yeah, I think everyone in our audience, our members, are pretty aware there's much at stake. We've been talking about it since the beginning. Sorry, I don't know if you lost me. But really, the global South, specifically Asia and Africa and Latin America, are really championing solutions, are really concerned about the situation, and are really the ones who do not have the resources to keep dealing with this plastic pollution crisis. And this is something that if folks watch the plenary statement that were made by the UNEP Secretariat, Inger Anderson, if I'm not wrong, she herself said that we can't recycle our way out of this crisis, which is a very defining statement to make. While recycling has its merits, and I know that waste pickers have been doing it hard and long, and we know that we have to close the tap at some point, because if we don't close the tap right now, we are looking at further endangering our planet. And even if we start to close the tap right now, it will take us some decades to get to a point where we have this crisis in control, so to say. So that really is the defining sort of statement. And there were many other statements that were made. In fact, when I was, one example of the striking lack of the sort of understanding is when I was boarding the train this morning, and somebody saw this particular badge which says plastics are fossil fuels, and the gentleman started talking about, well, we have recycling, we should do better recycling, but the numbers speak for themselves, as well as the toxic impacts that we know that that really affect the health of all of us, and especially the frontline and fence line communities who are employed in the plastic value chain, as well as the waste pickers and waste workers. And on that, we have the waste picker, waste workers hosting a side event on what they want the treaty to contain. And they're really organizing themselves. And I get to speak to them every day. And we had them yesterday on the Global South briefing as well. So please do chime in and listen to that conversation and that to know what's happening. And one of the things that will come up in due course of time is also the financial mechanism, right? How will we implement this treaty is also a question for us in Asia region, because we don't really have the kind of resources that we need, and whatever resources are decided, and a lot of the civil society organizations recommend a global multilateral fund, it should come to Asia, and it should definitely come to civil society groups who are at the front line of dealing with this crisis, and especially the waste picker groups, because Just Transition calls for that kind of support in terms of capacity building, training, and that's what I heard yesterday that I would really like urge others to also listen in on. Sonia.
Okay, so yesterday through the No Space for Democracy action, civil society organizations raised their voices and emphasized the importance of engaging with affected communities instead of big industries. How was this received by the UNEP?
Yeah, I don't have the details on that, but we know that we sent out letters before, much before we actually came in. We sent out requests, we sent out concerns many times. UNEP did host like a conversations on, I believe, Sunday evening, 5 p.m. our time here, and they seemingly heard the problem, but I think it's little too late. And right now, I don't think we can do much about what's happening at INC2. For example, I can't get into the plenary today. I'm just watching it from a different room. And I don't know if I can even hear on the contact groups coming on. So there's a lot of uncertainty, Sonia. We get to the meeting in the morning, and that's when we find out what's happening, what's not. And multiple groups are trying to help each other to sort of figure out how we can access and sort of tag team each other. But broadly, the point is that we are thinking about how do we ensure this does not happen in the next INC, which is going to be in Nairobi. Folks are concerned that the space that UNEP has there is also pretty limited. And as we have seen from INC1 going into INC2, the number of registrations, the number of the participation, even from member states, from governments, is increasing. And it's going to increase even more in INC2 as the stakes grow higher, as we actually go into thinking about the content and really the meat of the treaty. So we're working towards that now. And I know, for example, for INC4, the Canadian government is starting to speak to some of the rights holders to seek and make access better, which is a positive move, but I can't speak on behalf of the communities who are coordinating that. But that's just an inside information.
Thank you so much for that, and it's a bit of good news. No? So are there any other civil society actions planned today, and can you tell us more about it, the objectives, and how can people participate offline?
Yeah, so what I'm realizing here that almost every day there is some kind of action being planned. Some actions are more a direct action where groups of people come together and sort of hold some hoardings or call out for certain message. The Greenpeace installation is an interesting example that was set up late last week. I've not had the chance to look at it, but perhaps we have enough collaterals to share with the members here. There was also the action yesterday on lack of access, where folks make statements as the group they represent. You could be indigenous people or a waste picker, or however you identify yourself as Global South. The access was really lack of access was really highlighted, and I think it was captured in the media in different forums as well. And today, this morning, right outside the UNESCO building, Tier Fund actually put up another sort of direct action where folks came together. And when I was looking at it, it was pretty representative. It was a small group, but it was representative of most of the regions that you can think of, where they called out for a strong treaty because plastic pollution actually causes flooding and exacerbates the chances of flooding. And given that I live in Mumbai in India, which is a coastal city, which is pretty well known for flooding annually and sometimes even more frequently, I was really interested in participating and sort of showing solidarity. They released a report, I believe, a few days back last week that we should also share with members, which says that there are about 280 million people who are in direct threat of flooding. I'm pretty sure the numbers are more. But that's one of the ways that climate crisis and plastic crisis really come together by making the flooding incidents worse and more frequent. And in Mumbai, for example, we had flooding in July of 2005, and this is really long time back, where we know that it was the clogged drains because of plastic that made it worse. And I could tell you that people were stranded for hours and hours, almost like a day, in fact, trapped in their offices, trapped on the streets, and there is loss of life every year as a result of flooding. So we really need to protect our communities, and a plastic treaty is important for that. And that's one of the ways that climate movement should be able to think about why this matters and how we can have them as allies in the movement supporting us strongly. Back to you.
Okay, finally, Arpita, we know that you're busy at the moment, but before we let you go, can you tell us what your expectations for day 2 are as the negotiations unfold?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have hopes. I don't think I have expectations because I always feel like expectation is the road to misery, because you never meet your life doesn't meet expectations ever. But the hope is that we reach consensus. The hope is on the voting, that voting rights have a win, because if we don't have that, getting into contact groups is already sort of a low point to start with, because we really need a binding treaty. We really need small island states, Asia Pacific, and all of those impacted countries who've been reeling under disproportionately reeling under the plastic crisis to have a voice. So my hope is that we reach a decision on that, and we reach it today, so that this particular meeting, INC2, does not go wasted. And I think we'll get into objectives. Tomorrow, I want to talk to our members about objectives and the meat of the discussion, and not this rules of procedure anymore, because it's really time we move on, and we need to spend this time constructively and not go back, in circles about the same old things.
Thank you so much, Arpita. So
here's I talk to you all again.
Yes, we'd love to see that. So you still have 3.5 days there. So listening into the discussion, and of course, I'm hoping you get to enjoy the view as well. So thanks, Arpita, for the comprehensive report. Join us again tomorrow as we follow the progress of the ongoing INC2. You may check out our social media platforms as we bring you the latest highlights and developments of the negotiations. Again, thank you and good evening.
And please send us your questions if there is anything burning that I can help members with. If there is any specific thoughts or questions, you can also just write to me. I'd be happy to help. Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Arpita.
Have a good evening.